welcome back to the channel. We're once again working on our 2013 Buick Enclave all-wheel drive. The last time we got all our pieces cut out. Now it's time to get them back up in there and start welding it up. So our piece is all prepped from last time, so now we're going to slide it in there. It's actually 3 different pieces. It's going to take a little bit of work to get it in here, slide it between the panels and behind other panels, but it's a lot less work than taking each individual piece apart and then trying to weld it all back together. So we'll spend a little time getting it to fit. The bottom, and it's sandwiched in between the 2 pieces there, so we need to get it behind the outer piece and in front of the inner piece. That part's in. Now we need to get the wheelhouse out around the frame rail, and then we'll slide it down. We need to get our overlapped wheelhouse overlapped. We use some scrapers to kind of pry the piece over. Just kind of work it all the way along. Try not to bend it too much. The more you bend it, the more you got to straighten it. Can't put too much tension on it or you'll never get it to slide past. This is a lot easier with 2 people. That's why I had the gnome stop roaming for a little bit. Sometimes you got to back it up a little bit. We'll try scrapers from both sides, and we'll try tapping it in. Hopefully this is the worst part. Okay, now it's getting close. Now at the front edge here, there's another spot where the panels are sandwiched between the other panels. We got it. Once it's in there, it's not coming back out. Check our line up on the top, and we'll line up our bottom piece, straighten out everything we mangled, which you could see if we didn't have a gnome standing in the way. So he gets sent away. Rebuilding cars is hard enough. Trying to worry about where the gnomes are while you're working on them, that just adds to the problems. So to line up our overlap panel, it's pretty easy. I left the spots that had holes in it, so we just line up our holes. We'll clamp it all up so it's nice and tight. Then we're going to weld the top and the bottom. So it'll be welded on both sides of our seam with about a 4-inch overlap. It will be plenty strong. And there's no need to do any body work on it. The inside is going to be covered up with foam and other pieces, and the inside of the wheelhouse will be covered up with a liner. Not to mention, once we grind it down, you're not going to see it anyway. So now we're going to clamp everything up where it belongs. We scribed all our lines. We're just going to use those. We'll take a few measurements on the inside just to make sure it's right. And we'll start tacking it up. We'll start with our seam. We'll do a little spot, then we'll move a little further down, do another little spot. We don't want to weld the whole thing all at once or it will warp it. So we'll just keep going along until it's all welded up. Letting it cool each time. I'll put our blanket back up before we have a fire. And there are a lot of people that say fire would be an improvement to this vehicle. Keep welding our seam. So while my evil twin continues to weld up the inner structure, I'm going to come over here and prep our outer quarter panel. Just cut little sections off of our old one, clamped it up, and we're going to scribe our lines. Use the holes that were in there to get everything lined up. Do the same thing with the D-pillar. A lot easier than trying to measure. Just try not to stab your fingers with the pick. Or stab your fingers with the pick if that's what you're into. Of course, you could always wear gloves. I'll scribe our line on the rocker. You can see this one is pretty easy. Just line up the holes where the clips go in. Pull off our clamps. We're not going to toss those in the pile just yet. We're going to need to cut some scraps off there for our backing. But before we do that, we're going to trim our quarter now. Just trim right on the line. Some quarters, you can just take the quarter panel, sit it up there, and just trim right through this piece and the piece below. You don't have to mark everything, and it'll cut one time, everything in the same spot. But the way this quarter fits around other pieces, it won't fit tightly. So it's easier to do it in little pieces like this. Some quarters just set right up there. It's pretty easy to do it that way. This is not one of those. Now we're just going to trim off the burrs from where we cut it. Make sure the ends are nice and clean. And we'll clean off the paint around where our seams are going to be so we can weld through it. Spending a little time prepping it makes your welding go a lot easier. I had a lot of comments that why am I wasting my time rebuilding this? And if you're rebuilding cars for yourself, pick what you like. If you're rebuilding cars to sell and you're only fixing what you like, you're doing it wrong. You need to fix what your customer likes. Once upon a time, I used to try to reason with my customers of why they don't need the ridiculous SUV to haul around one kid. Now I just ask what color they want. Let the customer figure it out. I can't save people from themselves. So, if they like these things, I'm going to fix them, I'm going to sell them. I don't have to like them. I usually end up doing all the service on them, so I'll get to see it again. Now we'll cut the D-pillar. And there's our overlap seam. That's the inside, where it's going to be covered by foam. We primed it all because we're never going to see this again and we don't want it rusting. And that's what it looks like inside the wheelhouse. That little piece on the bottom is all that's really going to show. And once we put the wheel liner in it, none of it's going to show. So now we're going to put our inner support on. Look, hearing protection. I didn't want to listen to the gnome grind. Lining this up is pretty easy. I'm just putting it over the old spot welds because I just had to drill through those to get the lower panel off. And honestly, if this is off a couple millimeters, you're never going to know. It's all hidden inside there. Exact replacement is not critical on this part. But given some of the work I've seen from some of the rebuilders out there, it turns out exact fitment isn't real critical on any part. Not even exact fitment, just fitment in general. So we threw our quarter up here just to get it out of the way. We cleaned up the shop. Now we're going to have to take it off the frame rack and put it on its wheels before we put the quarter on. Make sure everything fits right, all of our gaps look nice. We don't want to weld it all up with the weight hanging off the back and then put it back on its wheels and it closes our gap shop, because that can't happen. So let's get it back on its wheels and fit the quarter. So we'll throw our donut on here. It's the only thing that'll fit with our suspension all jacked up. Raise up the lift. Put our stands under it. And we had a chain on it. This frame rack is about 35 years old, I believe. No, 40 years old. So the clamps don't exactly hold super tight. So I put a chain on there just to hold everything down, make sure that the car doesn't pull out of the clamps when I'm pulling on it. Set it down on the stands. And now we can pull our clamps off. Unbolt our clamps from the other side. Our rear clamp, we just replaced it with a 2x4 because we needed to get in where the clamp was holding it. So the 2x4 just holds the car level. Since we weren't pulling, it didn't really matter. Sometimes I'll leave those clamps loose if I'm pulling and the part that the clamp is on is in. That way it'll slide. This time, 2x4 did the job. So we can slide our clamps off. I really miss it when the pizza girl took these off. It was always funny. She refuses to do it anymore. One of these days I'll trick her into coming back. Maybe I'll disguise it to look like a tire. So we pulled our quarterback off. Now we're going to throw some weld through primer on all of our welds. The ones we haven't already done. Across our seams as well. And the one little part in the back that overlaps. And we'll use our custom masking system. Biodegradable for all you green people out there. Now we're going to throw our backings in. We'll start with the D-pillar. We just trim those off of our old pieces. We'll drill our holes in the quarter. Now we'll slide the backings up there and clamp them up. Everybody always asks why I have so many vice grips. Well, that's why. Because now I can just weld each hole and I don't have to keep stopping and moving vice grips. So that piece is up. Now we'll do our C-pillar. Same way. Slide the backing up there. Clamp it up. That whole backing, I just cleaned it all off and then coated it all with weld through primer because the majority of that is going to get welded through. Either the spot welds on each side or the seam in the middle. Start with the corners and clamp them up so they're nice and tight. And we'll clamp the flat part. If you start with the flat part, you get to the corners, sometimes you'll have gaps. So we ran out of clamps. Got to borrow one from over there and move it over to the side. Now one more piece. It's on a rocker. Top of the rocker is up against the piece underneath, so we don't need a backing on it. But this outer piece does have space in between, so we'll put a backing in there. Can't get the clamp in there, so we're going to use our breaker just to wedge it up against the other piece. And then we'll weld it. And if we're lucky, we won't weld our breaker into the vehicle. That happens occasionally. So now we're going to throw our glue back up here, our structural binding adhesive, made by Elmer's. Actually, it's TranStar, I believe. This gives you 90 minutes to work with. So we're going to put it up there and we have 90 minutes to get the quarter on and in place, and hopefully weld it up. If not, you got to start all over. Now we did dry fit it in between, which is without all the glue and foam and everything else, because once you put all this stuff on, if you don't get it right, you got to wait for it all to dry to remove it all. It turns into a big mess. So you always dry fit it first. As long as it fits, you're good. You put all the solvents on there. So after we put our strip of glue on here, we brush it out with an acid brush. It has to be bare metal underneath it for the glue to adhere. So we just kind of smear it all over the place, make sure it covers it, because if it is bare metal and it's not totally covered, it's a spot for it to rust. We put our foam around our gas door and our foam around the wheel well. We also put glue on the opposite side of that same spot. Now we'll fit our piece up there. The foam that we put around the gas door, it expands very slowly. I think you've got about half an hour to work with. So we'll get it all clamped up here, and it'll just expand and adhere that quarter onto our inner quarter. Move it around. Need to put our door gasket in. You always want to make sure you put those in, because it will change how the door closes. Sometimes without the door gasket, the door closes perfectly. You put the gasket in and then it doesn't close right. So you always want to fit it with the gasket in there. And our gap is looking pretty good. Even all the way down. A little tight at the top, but that's actually how it's supposed to be. Our front door gap is nice, even all the way down. It was pulled back a little bit. And there's our gap on the other side. See? A little tighter at the top. Hey, I didn't build the car, I'm just making it match. So we're going to let my evil twin keep welding over there. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get the tire ready. We're sending the wheel back for a core, so we got to take everything we need off of it, which really is just the center cap and tire sensor. We don't need the tire, it's got a little hole in it. So we break the bead. You want to make sure you break it where the sensor is not, or you will crack the sensor off inside. I know this from experience. So you just break the bead, leave the sensor 180 degrees in the other direction, spin the tire around and break the bead on the other side. Now we aren't out of the woods yet with saving that sensor. We did get a new tire machine too. Fancy new toy. Much better than the old Ranger junk. Now we'll pull the bead around the outside of the wheel. This you want to start right where the tire sensor is. That way, when the bead falls into the drop center, it won't snag the tire sensor. It's already up above the rim. So we're going to go around. We're going to start the other bead in the same place, right where the tire sensor is. And our tire sensor survived. They're not as expensive as they used to be, but I still don't want to buy one, so I'm going to try and save it. So this style of TPMS sensor unscrews from the valve stem. The valve stem stays in there. Just take out the little T10 Torx and pull the sensor off. These are much better than the ones with the nut on the aluminum sensor that corrode and snap off. Or better yet, the genius design that straps the sensor to the inside of the wheel. Wonder who could have created that. So now that our core is ready for the wheel guy to pick up, we're going to go ahead and take our car apart so that the bodywork gnome can show up. We'll pull the wheel opening molding off the right rear. It's got a couple clips on the inside. Just kind of squeeze them with a pair of pliers. If you try the wiggle and pull method, these things are plastic and they're pretty weak. They like to break. So with the wheel liner out, it's pretty easy to get back there and squeeze the tabs and save those wheel opening moldings. So now we're going to put our seam sealer on. Bodywork gnome's already been here. Primed our whole quarter. There were some scratches in it, a couple little dings he took care of. So rather than paint it up like a cow with spots everywhere, we just primed the whole thing. Less problems in the long run. So we got our seam sealer on there. Now we're going to smear it all around. The Michael Jackson one glove look. And then we'll go over it with a little bit of wax and grease remover, soften it up and smooth it out. I'll let the gnome do that while I do the inside. Same way. I'm not using nearly as much as the factory, but still quite a bit. And now we'll do inside our wheel well. We just put the seam sealer wherever the factory had it. It actually goes all the way up and around, but because we didn't take those panels apart, we didn't break the seam sealer, we only need to go up to where we took the seam sealer out. I'll pull our C-pillar trim down on the passenger side. Fish the seat belt out of here. If I can remember how to get it out of here. I have to pull the little plastic piece out of it. Then you can get the seat belt out. Pull the glass out. Let me go get my tool. The hammer isn't working right today. Probably because it's the brake job hammer. So that's as far as we're going to go today. We're going to wait for the painting gnomes to come in here and edge everything out, and then we can start putting it all back together and get it ready for them to paint the outside. Change the suspension and make it drivable. So until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.